Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And we are about midway through the 2039-2040 offseason, and as we sit here on December 24th, a little bit of a pre-Christmas miracle for us here on Christmas Eve. 4 consecutive days with an episode. We've gone, I think, a couple weeks without reaching that amount with busyness in the real world, so glad to be able to spend a little more time over the past several days playing OOTP. Want to start off the episode again by wishing everyone Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, whatever you celebrate. Looking forward to hopefully having a little bit of time off over the remainder of this week and spending it with family and friends, and I hope that all of our viewers enjoy the holidays as well. As usual, appreciate the great feedback that we got from the Worldwide Scouting Department in response to the last episode. We've got the international free agent signing period beginning today, and unlike previous seasons, only $5.23 million to spend for the Oakland A's. We've gotten very used to and very comfortable of having the maximum $5.7 million to spend, but we no longer qualify to do that. As I mentioned, the Worldwide Scouting Department was very helpful, giving us a lot of feedback on what we should consider. Go through some of the key players that were identified by the members of the Worldwide Scouting Department before we get to making a decision. Starting with the pitchers, Jorge Morfa is the choice of Jarek Braxton. The 17-year-old is already throwing in the mid-90s. A lot of good positive personality traits, although he is not the sharpest tool in the shed. That being said, we think he can have an outstanding fastball and an outstanding slider. Honestly, even at the age of 17, his fastball is not far off major league quality. So his stuff could be exceptional with slightly above average movement and slightly above average control if he reaches his full potential. Clearly has a lot of work to do on the control end, but at 17 years old, there's a lot of time for the right-handed reliever to hopefully make some improvements there. Stamina not exceptional and only 2 pitches right now, but given the high adaptability and the high work ethic, which hopefully would not be offset too much by the low intelligence as we're trying to get him trained up and perhaps spend a lot of time with him in the development lab. Not inconceivable that he could improve his stamina a bit over the years, maybe at a 3rd or 4th pitch in and become a pretty interesting starting pitching prospect. And that is the direction that Jarek Braxton would go if it was up to him. And we also had an interesting plan put forth by Avery Shaham, another one of our scouts. He suggested going with Alexis Sevilla, a relatively inexpensive young reliever with high adaptability, work ethic, and intelligence. Only 16 years old, another 2-pitch guy who looks more like he's probably a pure reliever, but think that his stuff could be outstanding as well, and his movement and control could both be above average if he reaches his full potential. Does have a personality that I think gives him a really good shot of getting close to his full potential, particularly with the good scouting we have, the good coaching we have, and the big investment that we've traditionally made into player development. And Avery suggested perhaps pairing Mr. Sevilla with the hitter in the pool that Avery believes is the best overall hitter, and that's the shortstop Salvador Sabola. We think his contact can be a bit above average. His gap power is clearly above average, and his home run power and his eye both well above average. Does have high adaptability and work ethic. Not the greatest speed in the world, and not the greatest defensively right now, but certainly could grow into becoming a more useful defensive player. And Avery Shaham's assertion is that Cibola is the best hitter in the draft, or in the IAFA pool more accurately, and then making a play for Cibola, who's looking for 3.2 million, with Sevilla, who's looking for a little less than 500,000. Locking the two of those players up would be the recommendation from Mr. Shaham, and I think it is certainly a interesting recommendation. I think I probably disagree a little bit with Avery in that I don't think that Cibola is clearly head and shoulders the best hitter in this draft. That being said, I think when you look at his profile compared to the other profiles, I probably would lean to him as being the batter with the profile that I like the best. But it's a closer call for me than I think it is for Avery, but appreciate the feedback, and that's certainly another interesting decision to think about. Wyme943 noted that his favorite player is the second baseman Sergio Jas, 16-year-old right-handed hitter. And there's definitely a lot to like here. Any player who potentially could have 70 plus contact and 75 plus power is a potentially devastating offensive force. We don't know a ton about his personality. Doesn't seem like it's real good. Doesn't seem like it's real bad, but that could evolve over time. But certainly a line drive hitter who could be batting over 300 while consistently hitting 30 plus homers a year if he reaches his full potential is certainly very interesting. And his gap power could be a bit above average and also could draw some walks as well. So Fungo Jas is the recommendation from Wyme943. And Wyme943's second choice was the catcher Tawasi Zuabri, who is another really interesting prospect, another guy who potentially has 70 plus contact, 75 plus power. Now his gap power and his eye aren't necessarily going to be quite as good as we think that Jas can get, but Zuabri does have the advantage of looking like a pretty good defensive catcher already, and someone if who we can make a little bit of improvements over time could be an outstanding defensive catcher with a bat that is very interesting for someone wearing the tools of ignorance. Got another recommendation on Zuabri from Blade Staff, and he gave us the fact that he likes Zuabri, and he also likes the other catcher, Juan Soriano. Soriano, better arm, not quite as good defensively as Zuabri, but potentially world-class home run power and a well above average eye. As I noted last episode, the question to me for Soriano is, can he make enough contact and how often is he going to strike out? And those are definitely concerns, but still a very interesting prospect that we are considering as well. So talking through the scouting reports that we've received thus far, you may be saying to yourself, boy, it seems like there's not a lot of consensus this year. And that's because I haven't shared the information from most of the scouts with you. And that brings us back to Tawasi Zuabri and Paul West, Dodo Dude, Scott Donovan, Not My Four Ply, and Calvin Ha all had Zuabri on the top of their list. So along with Blade Staff and Wyme943, Zuabri is definitely the consensus choice. And I understand it. As I said, that 70 contact, 70 home run power plus potential in those two categories is huge. The gap power, obviously not great, but he doesn't have a ton of speed anyways, so who cares? But you know, if he could get that contact 60 plus, power 60 plus, get that eye even just to being major league average, you combine those ratings with someone who we think is a pretty solid defensive catcher And if he improves a little bit defensively and works on his arm a little bit, could be an outstanding defensive catcher with a really good bat. I definitely understand that Mr. Zuabri is the most popular player out there as far as the worldwide scouting department here in the 2040 IAFA signing period. And I think this is a year where we're going to go after, as we often do, one of the big guns. And the big guns for me this year are largely the batters. None of the top pitching prospects to me are guaranteed to become starters, so the prices for most of them is a bit prohibitive for a player who more likely than not probably ends up a reliever. As much as I like Soriano and appreciate Bladestaff's thoughts on him, if we're going to go with a catcher, I think Zuabri is the way to go. I just fear the number of strikeouts and the inability to make consistent contact with Soriano, even though the home run power and the eye are incredibly attractive. Guinard Caprera is also one of the 5-star prospects that I don't think I'm going to immediately pursue. Outstanding potential contact, but the gap power, the home run power, and the eye don't look like they'll be exceptional. If the gap power does develop, he's still incredibly slow, so that doesn't help, and he doesn't bring a ton to the table defensively. So that leaves us with Cebola, Jas, and Zuabri, all of whom come highly recommended by various members of the worldwide scouting department. Jas, to me, is really interesting. As I mentioned, the additional gap power that he has over Zuabri is pretty interesting, particularly given that he at least has average speed. That being said, I think best case scenario is he's kind of a adequate defensive second baseman, while best case scenario, I think Zuabri is an above average defensive catcher. And given that the gap power is really the only difference between them in terms of where we think their ceiling is, and neither one of them gives us any particular insights into their personality, if I had to choose between Zuabri and Jas, I think I'm going to go with Zuabri. But we still do have Salvador Cebola in the mix, and he is interesting. Another guy who I think is probably a adequate defender in the infield when all is said and done. And again, I have pretty high standards for defense in the game and pitching in the game, as those of you who have followed me know. So might be being a little harsh on him, but I don't love playing infielders, particularly at second, third, and short, that aren't good. Does have some positive traits with the high adaptability and work ethic. Don't love the low leadership. He's got a lot of work to do in terms of consistently making contact and avoiding strikeouts, but he is barely 16 years old, so there's a lot of time for him to make up the difference there. The gap power looks like it could be really good. A bit, I don't want to say wasted, but he's certainly not going to take full advantage of it with the 40 speed. But I talked about how much I like the 70 contact and 70 plus power combination in terms of potential that both Mr. Jas and Mr. Zuabri had. And to be fair to Cebola, although his contact is the worst of those three, he's still got potentially a 70 eye and 70 plus power if he reaches his full potential. So certainly the ability to get on base consistently through walks, even though he may not hit for quite the same average as a Jas or a Zuabri ultimately do. When all is said and done, I kind of like the catcher. I think I'm going to go with what the worldwide scouting department recommends. We do have a guy we haven't talked about, Ginessa Moreno, looking for less than $300,000 at this point, who's a durable player with a pretty solid hitting profile, good range, good speed. Also a guy who says he's a second baseman. I don't know that he really is, but certainly could play a more than competent first base with the infield ratings he has and his 6'4" height. Would love the opportunity to potentially mix a Moreno and or a Sevilla into the mix. But given that we don't have as much money to spend as other teams right now, I want to do everything possible to ensure that we get one of our top players. So unlike some other years, I'm not going to spread the money all out to start. I want to ensure that we can hopefully lock up a top player early. So what we are going to do is talk to Mr. Zuabri. Says he's looking for $3 million. We are going to come in with $3.75 million, so 25% more than he's looking for. Submit that offer to Mr. Zuabri, and the hope is that perhaps we can get him signed relatively quickly, in which case we'd have about $1.5 million left to potentially chase after Mr. Moreno and Mr. Sevilla if they're still on the market. But what I don't want to do is put out an offer right now to Moreno or Sevilla, have them accept that offer, and then find ourselves in a bidding war for Zuabri in a week or two where we don't have the ability to offer him the full $5.23 million to potentially get him locked up, if that's what we might need to do to get him on the team next year. And obviously we are in a little bit of a situation where there's 8 teams out there that can bid more than we can right now. So certainly no guarantee that we're going to get him, but hopefully coming in with a strong bid from the start. And the fact that we think we've got a pretty good relationship with him and that signing him should be very easy will work in our favor to get the South African catcher locked up in the next couple of weeks. And the other thing that we have been talking about over the past few episodes at this point is the young shortstop Chisin Iwata, international free agent out of Japan, and think he could be a really good asset to our team going forward. His contract demands have already gone up once. Supposedly he favors our offer, but we put that offer out about 2.5 weeks ago and haven't heard anything back from him. So a little concerned that he's using us. Both Peter Hooper and Paul West, in comments to recent episodes, have said that as well. Thinking back to Shohei Bame and some other international free agents over the years where we've gotten into bidding wars with the Dodgers and other teams. And I don't think it's inconceivable that Iwata doesn't really want to sign with us here in Oakland, is just trying to use us to bump up the price. If that's the case, it gives us an opportunity to perhaps pivot to a shorter contract with someone like Frank Itzturis if we wanted to look to a free agent to potentially build out our infield a little bit more. But with Landin, Pimentel, and Toribio at second, third, and short, potentially, although Toribio is probably fighting for his job and could end up moving to second if we'd prefer to play Landin at short. And Alcindor and the youngster Godina also in the mix for utility infield and or first base spots. And honestly, as I said, it's not conceivable that Toribio ends up becoming a utility infielder and we do something like Godina at first, Alcindor at second, Landin at short, and Pimentel at third. Not necessarily a huge need for Itzturis or Iwata. And if we don't end up with Iwata in particular, that probably does increase the chance that we could bring back the franchise Jake Ortega, who will likely be moving to first base or DH this year to try to keep the wrecked 32-year-old's outstanding bat in the lineup. So trying to put an optimistic spin on things. Obviously, we'd love to ultimately bring Mr. Iwata on board. But if he is using us, we probably can't win a bidding war with the Dodgers, or probably there's 15 or 20 teams in baseball right now we can't really win a bidding war with. And if we do have to move on from Iwata, as I said, it makes it a much more realistic path for us to potentially keep the franchise on board and see if we can have Ortega spend all of what we hope will be a Hall of Fame caliber career with the Oakland A's. So, not saying I don't want to sign Iwata, but if we discover in the coming weeks that he is just kind of using us and we have to move on, we'll try to make some lemonade out of those lemons. And one day into the IAFA signing period, Zouabri has given us feedback that the offer is fair, and unless someone offers him a better deal, he'll sign with us. So that is really good news. But we also got what I hope will be great news. Chisin Iwata, after we didn't hear from him for 2.5 weeks, signs with us today. So I agreed with some of the viewers and commenters that it felt like other years with him already coming back to us and wanting more money once, and some bigger market teams being involved, that he probably and possibly didn't want to play in Oakland. But Iwata has signed that contract to join the Oakland A's. Only slightly front-loaded now, given that we had to increase it from $75 million originally to $95 million. But I think that puts us in an absolutely outstanding spot for our infield. We're going to likely have Landin at shortstop, Pimentel at third base, Chisin Iwata at second. Andy Toribio should be an outstanding utility infielder for us. And then we should have Amari Alcindor and the youngster Godina fighting to potentially play as a starting first baseman and then also as a utility infielder. I guess in theory Toribio could also compete for the first base spot, but given the way Toribio is hit over the last several years of his career, where he's been a below average offensive player for us after a really nice start to his career, I think Toribio at this point, with the excellent defense, the excellent personality, and the versatility to play just about anywhere on the field except catcher, as well as being an Iron Man who's got pretty good instincts on the base paths, with the fact that his hitting profile right now is fairly pedestrian. And as I mentioned, he's been a below average offensive player for each of the past 4 years after that really nice start to his career, and is a 1% below average player over the course of his career, whether you're looking at OPS plus or WRC plus. Think that with his profile, he will slot in very well as an outstanding utility infielder for us, someone we're very comfortable having in the lineup for an extended period of time if players get banged up. And his contract is certainly reasonable. We signed him to a pretty ambitious 8-year, $17.5 million deal 6 years ago. We exercised his team option for this penultimate season at $3 million, and we've got the same terms potentially for next year. So $3 million for a very good utility infielder is something that I think we can certainly afford to spend in Oakland, and Toribio almost certainly will end up as a utility infielder for us, with the fact that Chisin Iwata is a member of the Oakland A's, and being able to bring a 23-year-old free agent into the organization to really give our infield a boost is a great asset. As I mentioned, it's going to make it tougher to bring back Ortega next offseason, but given Ortega's age and health, there's no guarantee that we're going to be able to keep him healthy, even playing him primarily at less demanding defensive positions, or if he ends up a DH, a position that puts no demands physically on him defensively. Still doesn't mean that we're going to be able to keep him healthy for 140 plus games. And given that he's missed about 100 plus games 2 of the last 3 years, no guarantees that despite the emotional attachment to Jake Ortega, that bringing him back at $30 million a year through his mid to late 30s is the right decision. So we'll kick the can on that decision down the road. As I talked about in previous episodes, there are still paths. I don't know why the total money available. I guess it's because we haven't actually put Iwata on to the roster yet. We're going to have to make a move on the secondary 40-man roster to bring him on board. But back to the point I was starting to make before I interrupted myself and went in a different direction. There are levers we can press to bring Ortega back next year. Certainly we could cut scouting and player development materially. Don't necessarily want to do that. Willing to cut them both a bit from where we think they'll be this upcoming season, but don't necessarily want to slash them. So if our outstanding young catcher develops the way that we hope he does, and that, of course, for those of you who have followed us, is Jonah Richards, who we think could be an outstanding left-handed hitter, number 10 prospect in baseball, and a really nice defensive profile. He's going to be competing for major league time this year. We love Jorge Mendoza, who's also a left-handed hitting catcher with a outstanding bat and a very good glove, very similar to the glove that we think Richards is going to have as well. But it could be an embarrassment of riches for us at catcher with both Mendoza and Richards in the mix, and then also the outstanding defensive catcher Hidetaka Ogata as a backup. So a year from now, could potentially look to trade away Mendoza, who we'd likely get some pretty interesting assets back in return from before his final arbitration-eligible season. If some of the young pitchers really develop this year, we could look to trade away Doug Weiss. Not sure how we're going to feel about potentially spending $6 million a year on Sergio Palomares. He's really going to need to take over that center field position this year and do a good job with the bat for us to want him back at $6 million next year. He likely will be getting the first crack at it, since I think in my mind I'm pretty sure that Jake Ortega is not going to be a center fielder for us next year. But there are definitely some levers that we can press to get some money out of the payroll structure next year and potentially be heading into the 2041 season with both Ortega and Iwata on the roster. But as I said, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Right now, very happy to have Mr. Iwata on board, and now we'll wait and see what happens with Zuabri. So with Iwata on board and the trades we made earlier in the offseason to bring on the pitcher Mendick, the outfielder McIlvain, and the fact that we also re-signed the relief pitcher Hunsaker before we got to free agency, don't think there's going to be much else at the major league level that we look to do with this team over the next month or so until spring training gets underway on the 21st of February. Preseason begins 8 days from now. I think the big thing that we are monitoring at this point is, do we end up signing Zuabri quickly? And if so, can we pivot to a couple of those other players that we really liked who weren't looking for big-time money? And with Iwata on board, we've gotten another updated scouting report on him, so now feeling very high scouting accuracy. And we actually think that maybe there is a little more to him as far as the home run power, which is good. I believe his contact is well above major league average already, and his gap power above average to go with good speed, pretty solid defensive profile, and some good positive personality traits with the high leadership, work ethic, and intelligence. Think he's going to draw enough walks to be a pretty effective offensive player for us. And again, really looking forward to seeing what this infield can look like next year, because between Landin, Pimentel, Toribio, Iwata, Alcindor, and the youngster Godina, I think we've got some incredible options. I think the only negative you could say about the infield is that 5 of the 6 players I mentioned are right-handed hitters. Landin is a switch hitter. If there was a left-handed hitter in that infield mix, that would make the group even better looking, given our lack of left-handed bats on the roster. But we're not going to play a left-handed hitter who's not as good over a right-handed hitter who we think is really good. And we think that all 6 of those infielders with their bats are potentially league average in the case of Toribio, to potentially well above average in several of the other players. And good news, the aggressive offer to Tawasi Zuabri has gotten him signed within just 5 days of when the IAFA period opened up. To make the room on the 40-man roster for Mr. Iwata. Unfortunately, we had to give up a player that we liked, Odilion Balbiano. Tried to trade him, and there wasn't really a ton of trade interest. 23-year-old, soon to be 24-year-old outfielder, kind of average defensively, average speed, but good contact, good gap power to go with well below average home run power and an eye that's not that great. Did not necessarily think he was going to be a big part of our organization. He's a guy who has not been in the organization for an incredible long period of time. We picked him up this past November when we traded away the reliever Mike Ross, who was a guy that we had picked in the Rule 5 draft a year ago, a left-hander that we just didn't see having a big future. Didn't mind having Balbiano in the organization, but as we saw when we were preparing our 40-man roster for the Rule 5 draft this past year, and some of the players we ended up losing, we've got a lot of talent on the 40-man right now, and at times we're going to lose players that we like, because our organization is pretty strong right now. But with Zuabri signed, feeling really good about that. Taking a deep dive into the pool. Janessa Moreno, the young center fielder, is still out there. Says he's looking for $320,000, so we could certainly afford him. On the pitching side, Alexis Sevilla also out there, and he said right now he's looking for $470,000. Would love to perhaps end up with both of these players. So we're going to be very aggressive, since we've got an opportunity to potentially bring in 3 of the 10 guys that we've had in camp consistently. So we're going to be aggressive. We're going to offer $750,000 to the pitcher Sevilla right now. Try to hopefully avoid getting in a bidding war with him and just get him on board as soon as possible. Similarly with Janessa Moreno, we're going to offer him $450,000 right now and see if perhaps we can get both of those players locked up in relatively short order. We've got another $280,000 to play with if they come back looking for more money. But I would certainly think that class of Zuabri plus potentially Moreno and or Sevilla could be a pretty nice class for us, particularly given that we're not playing at the top end of the market anymore in terms of the funds that we have available. And unfortunately, the young outfielder Moreno is looking for more money already. Says he's looking for $460,000. So that's honestly not that much more than we already offered him. I'm going to wait a day or two just to see what happens with Sevilla. I think if I can only bring on one of these players, I probably prefer Sevilla a bit over Moreno, but if we're able to wrap up Sevilla in the very near term and Moreno is still on the board, there's still a scenario where you can get both of them. I just want to make sure if we can only get one of them. I think I prefer Sevilla. Not an obvious, easy path for him to become a starter. He'd have to bulk up the stamina a bit and add an additional pitch at the very least. But he does have a personality that makes that not completely unrealistic to think over the coming years we could have some good luck in player development and the development lab. Would love to have them both, but if I can only get one, I think Sevilla is the way to go. And I've simmed ahead a day to the start of the preseason, and I'm actually rethinking things a little bit. We had offered $450,000 to Moreno before. He said if we just add another $10,000 to $460,000, he'll come with us. But he was lying to me. He's not going to let us submit that offer. Oh, Janessa, you're being a little weaselly with us now. If we could have locked him up for $460, hopefully that would have still given us enough flexibility with Sevilla. But now that he's playing games with us, we're going to wait a little bit and play some games with him as well. And fortunately, we have gotten Sevilla inked for the $750,000 we offered him. So love bringing him in along with Zuabri. I think with the fact that we've got Zuabri and Sevilla on board, we've done part or all of what every member of the Worldwide Scouting Department has suggested, with the exception of Jarek Braxton, who wanted us to go with a somewhat more expensive and potentially easier path to the starting rotation pitching prospect in Morpha. But with Mr. Sevilla on board, we can now pivot a bit more aggressively back to Janessa Moreno. We're going to bump the offer to him up to $500,000, and he's willing to think about that. So really like the class already with Zuabri and Sevilla on board, and I think we'll love the class if we're able to make one more big acquisition. And unfortunately, Janessa Moreno is a bit of a tease. Supposedly, we're the only team interested in him, and he liked our offer. But today, he's looking for more money. Says the Rays have offered him more, and his decision is almost made. And it looks like they've offered him more than we can possibly pay. So time to pivot to some of the more second-tier, cheaper options. I'll check in on the big-time options who aren't signed yet. The catcher Soriano is still out there, but I'm assuming he's way out of our price league. Yeah, you never know with some of these guys, but not shocking. The pitchers, these guys, as we mentioned, are all potential relievers. I tend to think we're not going to have enough to make a play on for them. Morpha looking for $2.2 million, but that's a lot more than we can spend at this point, unfortunately. Alfredo Bernal, $3.2 million. And Alexis Garza still says $2.2 million. Doesn't seem like these guys have a lot of offers out there, because they're not telling us that they've got an offer more than we can pay, but clearly we're nowhere in the neighborhood to even make them a realistic offer yet. And you can see here that Mr. Jas went for the full $5.7 million to Cleveland. First baseman Cabrera, $3.8 million to Miami. Cibola, a relative bargain for Milwaukee at less than $2.5 million. So some interesting prices in where these players ended up going. And we ended up bringing a second relief pitcher on board, not someone that we've talked about before. Alfredo Fuentes said he was looking for $1 million. We made an offer of $700,000 to him, which was the vast majority of the money we still had left. And he ended up accepting it. We're only average scouting accuracy on him, but another guy who we think could have outstanding stuff to go with plus movement and plus control if he completely develops. Obviously, a lot of work to do on his control and his stuff, but he is only 16 years old. So I think he's another interesting pitcher to add into the organization. So with Fuentes and Sevilla potentially in the bullpen down the line, and of course the catcher Zuabri as our prime signing, pretty pleased with the way that this IAFA period has worked out. And made one little mistake. Ended up clicking the wrong button. Was trying to play forward to the next week, but I clicked the next month. So we've actually gotten to the first game of spring training, even though I haven't necessarily set up the spring training rosters the way that I wanted to. What that means, though, is that we've gotten our results from the development lab here because we've already moved forward to the second day of spring training. But before we talk about that, we have been making some offers to some minor leaguers and reunited with a couple of familiar names. Kevin Stubblefield, guy that we had drafted that we thought was going to be a real important part of our offense. We traded him to the Red Sox several years ago at this point. He was a key part of the trade that brought us the first baseman Luis Lujan, who was an important member of our offense for a very short period of time, but got Stubblefield in his long extension off the books. He is now going to be in our minor league system, so reunited with Kevin Stubblefield. And then our fans in the United Kingdom will enjoy this one. Arturo Estrada, John Thomas Estrada, is back in the organization. The 28-year-old is now wrecked physically. Still a great influence in the clubhouse, good contact hitter with outstanding speed, and think he can potentially be a contributor to us as well, at least at the AA or AAA level. If we have a bunch of injury issues, maybe we see Stubblefield or John Thomas Estrada back with us in the majors, but hopefully those things will not happen. Now on to the development lab before we finish off the episode. Got an outstanding result from Jake Mendick, the pitcher we traded for at the start of the offseason. Secondary pitch improvement, his potential and current changeup improved by 5 and a little less than 5 respectively. Unfortunately, no improvement by the potential two-way player Mike Homer in plate discipline. No improvement from Wilson Rangel in his pitch movement. No improvement from Jesus Ramos in his pitch movement program. And no improvement from the former first-round pick Coy Simmons in his contact program. Did get an outstanding result from David Palomares in his plate discipline, potential and current eye, both improved by 5. The youngster had a really nice year for us in the DSL last year at the age of 20, probably will be an A-ball this year, former prime IAFA signing of ours. No improvement on the two-strike approach for Jonah Richards, who is likely our future catcher, as we talked about. No improvement in the Hail Mary strength and conditioning program that we tried putting the franchise through. Mike Orozco, secondary pitch improvement successful. Looks like his sinker has improved. Amari Alcindor, no improvement with his home run power. Jesus Saldana, we're attempting to improve his pitch arsenal. No improvement there. Did get an outstanding result from Dave Baumler on secondary pitch improvement, and that is an outstanding result with his slider potential and current ratings both improving by 10. Mike Blumenshine with an outstanding result on his splitter, current and potential both improving 5 points there. Successful result for our closer Chuck Huntley on improving his arsenal. His changeup should be better. Outstanding result for Luis Godina on his two-strike approach. Current avoid strikeout rating improves 10. Potential avoid strikeouts improves a little bit as well. Godina is the youngster that I've been mentioning, could be in the mix to be our first baseman next year. Certainly in the mix to be in our infield, even with the addition of Iwata. And the fact that he's probably going to cut down on his strikeouts a lot should help him. You can see he's got a much better balanced profile with the improvement he made in avoiding strikeouts. Had a monster year in AAA a year ago, 295 average, 34 doubles, 35 homers, and 115 ribbies. And think that the young right-handed hitting outfielder who's the I guess he is an outfielder in addition to an infielder, number 95 prospect in baseball, could be in the mix for some significant playing time for us next year with the fact that we moved on from both our first baseman Bowers and our DH Ramos this past offseason. Juan Pimentel, your reigning American League Rookie of the Year, improved his BABIP rating a bit. Darnell Selvey, who finished second in the Rookie of the Year voting last year, also improved his BABIP as well. Federico Ariola, secondary pitch improvement, working on his sinker, was successful. Jorge Castillo, another young infielder in our organization, improved his eye. And last but not least, no improvement on improving the pitch arsenal for Ernesto Comunez. So when all was said and done, looks like we had 11 out of 20 programs that were successful or outstanding. Importantly, we didn't have any poor results. We did have those 9 no improvements, and obviously we talked through a lot of those in the early stages of going down this list before had a nice run of successful and outstanding programs to finish off our discussions. But 11 people improving in the development lab and nobody going backwards is a pretty respectable result. So before we move on to our next episode, obviously we're going to spend some time in the development lab seeing if we can hopefully improve some defense, improve some base running, maybe improve a little bit of bunting here and there. But pretty solid feeling, I think, overall at the end of this episode. Love the fact that we do have Iwata signed. Think he's going to be a great asset for our infield. Love the fact that we did end up with both Zuabri and Sevilla out of the IAFA period. And a hit rate of over 50% with nobody going backwards isn't an exceptional result from the development lab, but is pretty solid as well. So feeling pretty good about how this Oakland Athletics team and this Oakland Athletics franchise overall is positioned as we start preparing for next season. And we'll run through spring training, see what happens in the shorter 1-month development lab, make some final cuts, and hopefully stay healthy as we get ready for the regular season in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.